podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI Mentors series, where we showcase industry leaders sharing their journey to the top, offering their advice and wisdom to help you achieve your career goals.
Hello, welcome to the AI Mentors podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Alldus International. As part of our Alldus International podcast, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Firas Lethaus. Firas is the Head of Deep Learning Expert Center of Volkswagen Group at the Data Lab just outside of Munich. Firas, it is fantastic to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Firas, tell us a little bit about the job and the work that you do. And if you could dovetail in with the journey to now from academia to industry, it'd be great to give that context.
Yeah, sure. My current role is head of the Deep Learning Expert Center of the Volkswagen Group. And in that role, my job is basically to turn AI into revenue or to save costs. In that role, I focus on products development, and just coming up with useful solutions along the entire value-added chain. And yeah, I'm in that role now for 3.5 years. And the domains that we deal with are basically from autonomous driving to production, sales, after sales, finance, HR, you name it. Basically everything that the Volkswagen Group is dealing with. And yeah, prior to that, I worked at Audi in the development division for automated driving. And as part of that, I led the Competence Center for Machine Learning, where my job was basically to get machine learning into the domain of automated driving. Yeah, and prior to that, I worked 10 years at the German Aerospace Center, and before that in research, actually in neuroscience. The main difference that I see between academia and industry is really that in academia, you would mainly focus on models and on algorithm design, where you'd be using benchmark data sets. So the focus is really on the algorithms and the model. As an industry, you would focus on the data, on data pipelines, working products, and actually return on invest, because in the end, the aim is to make money with the product and utilizing the data. So that's sort of the main difference. And of course, the KPIs are different. In academia, you would be measured by number of papers, a number of publications, book chapters. And in industry, it's really about the working product and making use of the product and selling the product. This is what I would consider the major differences between these two worlds.
Thank you for that overview. You've been working on such interesting problems within aerospace and autonomous vehicles. They're particularly challenging ones to have. And with autonomous vehicles, it's a really interesting one because when you look at road safety accidents, over 1 million people die per year because of inattentiveness at the wheel and so many different accidents. So it is a problem worth solving. But a lot of the roads that we've got set up in the world aren't necessarily set up correctly for autonomous vehicles. So it's so different driving in a nice kind of road in Arizona where it's nice and straight, or if you're going down to a pretty straight car park. But when you actually go into the city and add some birds and cyclists, and what happens if you want to do a U-turn, these things become a lot more complicated.
Yeah, that's true. And there's definitely a use case and a reason to go into autonomous driving. And yeah, what you mentioned, not every road is really suitable for autonomous driving. We would, for example, see that in different world regions, where in Europe, we would rather focus on the vehicle and have the mindset that the vehicle is to replace a driver with its cognitive functions and needs to cope within the environment without any help from the environment. Whereas in world regions such as China, we would also include the infrastructure. For example, we would have intelligent road surfaces, curbstones that would communicate with the vehicle. We would have intelligent intersections. We would have buildings that would act as a reference for vehicles. And we would also utilize CCTV in order to create this omniscient view for vehicles, which they can then use for orientation. So these are the two major differences when it comes down to autonomous driving. And of course, the first one is more challenging because replacing a driver is challenging. And when I say replacing a driver, it's about trying to copy the strength rather than the weaknesses. And yeah, it's what I find quite interesting is that most people think that when it comes down to autonomous driving, the impression is that these vehicles drive with AI. But actually, the part of AI is only really in the perception part and in stabilizing the vehicle. The rest is really control theory, which is challenging in terms of merging the two. And yeah, it's very exciting and interesting to work in that area and to contribute with method knowledge, really.
You are listening to the Alldus podcast. When you're looking to scale your team, or if you are interested in showcasing your company in a future episode, reach out today. Or if you're in the market for a new role, visit our website to view open positions, www.alldus.com.
Firas, tell me a little bit about making the move from academia to industry, and what advice would you offer people that are going on that journey? Because you mentioned the focus on models and algorithm designs, and then when you're in industry, it's about making them profit, pipelining, making sure you're getting the data journey fit for purpose. Tell me about your thoughts in there.
What I really felt when moving from academia into industry was that I had a really strong need to do something applied. It was never really wanted to focus on theory only, on basic research, but there had to be a purpose, reason why I would look into certain areas. I think that was one of the major reasons that drove me. And what I also figured out was that I was not really happy with just doing basic research and just basically producing documents, producing papers. And so I always wanted to come up with something useful rather than finding ultimate pleasure in being cited in literature. And this is what really drove me. And I found this in sort of a transition phase when I moved from academia to the German Aerospace Center, which is a mixture of research and applied development. I could really see what the advantages and disadvantages were and where I really wanted to be. And this is why I decided after 10 years at German Aerospace Center to move into the automotive industry. And this is why I joined Audi.
When you look at the data science team, there's a real delicate dance between research and return on investment, and making sure each person's role adds value. And people can fall down rabbit holes when you're doing research, and a lot of the roles can be interchangeable. Tell us a little bit about team dynamics, team creation, the importance of agility and generating return on investment for the work that you do.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a question that can only be answered, I think, if you have gone through a journey and trying to find out what's really best and what makes up a good team, a functional team rather than a dysfunctional team. In AI or in data science, usually the first step is that you look at the data, that you try to understand the data. And if you then utilize data in order to develop a product, you need a tool set, a skill set that you would not necessarily find in data science, but in software development. So when looking at product development, the entire data science and AI field needs to be viewed from the software development perspective, because this is what it is in the end when it comes down to product development. So the challenge is to bring data scientists and AI engineers and software developers together and make them understand what's relevant, how to communicate, and how to build a functional data pipeline, as this is really essential. This is also quite often underestimated, but that's really the key. It's not just important to understand the data and have access to the data, but it's also important to have the data infrastructure in form of a data pipeline. And once you have that, it turns into classical software development where you have your full stack developers, your front end developers in order to make the product usable. You have your DevOps team. As part of that, you have your MLOps team, because as soon as we add new data to a live system, your concept or your model would change. This is called concept drift or model shift. So this needs to be taken care of. And of course, whatever you produce, whatever you develop has to be tested. So the role of testers should never be underestimated. And this is why we have that as a separate role. And that's really the mixture. You have, I would say, 60 or 70% is software development. The rest are data scientists and AI engineers with a focus on software development.
You've been listening to the AI Mentors podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Alldus International. And today I've been speaking to Firas Lethaus. Firas is the Head of Deep Learning Expert Center at Volkswagen Group at the Data Lab at Munich. And Firas has been giving us a little bit of an overview about his background and journey to now, how he got into the world of data science, and the importance of understanding effective communication in data science, and how you have to work with different teams, but making sure that you need to understand the relevance of what you're doing and the positive impact it can have on the business. Firas, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me, Mark.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.